Welcome to UO Today. I'm Barbara Altman, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest today is Tom Osdoba, Managing Director of the Center for Sustainable Business Practices at the U of O's Lundquist College of Business. He is also an affiliated faculty member of the Sustainable Cities Initiative. Osdoba has 20 years of experience developing public policy and creating innovative programs in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Before coming to the University of Oregon, Osdoba was the Sustainable Economic Development Manager for the City of Portland, where he created a framework to guide business development strategies for building a sustainable regional economy. Prior to a stint in Portland, Osdoba was the Sustainability Manager for the City of Vancouver, BC. He led initiatives for climate protection, green building and development, economic development strategy, and purchasing. His initiatives for neighborhood-scale clean energy systems have garnered awards and accolades. Osdoba came to the university in the spring of 2009. As Director of the Center for Sustainable Business Practices, he leads efforts in research, teaching, and outreach activities to further business practices that balance social, environmental, and financial responsibility. Tom, welcome to UO Today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
You're coming up on 2 years here, right?
Just about, yes.
So it was high time for us to get you into the studio, I think. You know that our theme this year at the Humanities Center is sustenance, so
right.
We could not but turn to you and have you explain what you're doing over there in the Lundquist College of Business.
Great.
So first of all, I'd like to know, you've worked in Portland, you've worked in Vancouver. What was attractive to you about coming to an academic setting?
Well, it's a very interesting question, and sometimes I think about it myself and ask myself, why would I do this? And the short answer for me is that I feel part of my job has been to foster and drive change within organizations around sustainability, and that's a very arduous and difficult challenge. A lot of organizations are designed to be somewhat resistant to change, and one of the things that is attractive to me about working in the university setting is twofold. One is I can really work with the next generation of business leaders, and so we have the opportunity to influence over time. I have that opportunity over time to influence a much larger group of people than I would within the context of a specific city or organization. The second is in an academic setting, I have an opportunity, and in some ways you could argue a responsibility, to be as honest and direct about the challenges with sustainability, and it has an impact. Somebody from the University of Oregon comes to a meeting, whether it's a business meeting or a public sector meeting or whatever, and says, you know, we really need to think about these three questions. Very hard to ask those questions or put those questions in the public debate if you represent that organization. It makes people nervous. It's very difficult to get to a place where everybody's comfortable talking about things, but they expect that from an academic institution that's engaged in the real world as well as teaching.
That makes a lot of sense to me. So you can really explore all dimensions of it without having to follow a particular program or take a particular line.
That's correct. That's
Got
correct.
it. So what is your direct involvement with students at the business school then?
Well, the center is focused predominantly on the MBA program. So we're working mostly with graduate students, and all of our MBA students at the U of O specialize in one of four areas. So there are 4 centers, 3 others like mine. And so I have a group, roughly a quarter of the MBA students, who I essentially shepherd through the program. I play a role in shaping the curriculum because they all have specialized curriculum that they study. And we emphasize at the U of O, we emphasize experiential learning, so they do a lot of real world work with companies outside of the college and in the company environment. And then I also provide a bridge between the students and the business community. And so my role is to do a whole lot of outreach to businesses, make sure that they know what kind of students we're producing, what kind of classes, if we can do projects with them to help them and give the students a learning opportunity, and to make sure that they know that they can come to the university for help in solving their problems.
You obviously know the Portland business community inside out and backwards from the years you worked there with the city. Did it take you a while to make those contacts and develop those networks here in Eugene?
Good question. It's a challenge to really dive into any new community I've found, whether it was Vancouver, Portland, or Eugene, and it takes some time. And the key for me is you find a few people who are really well-grounded and have been in the community for a long time, and they open a lot of doors, and they provide a lot of instant credibility in terms of the relationship, but then also validate what it is that we're trying to bring to the business community, and what things we're interested in talking with them about.
Here we are in the Pacific Northwest. You've worked in the Pacific Northwest for a lot of years. Is this a particularly good place to be doing this kind of an initiative in a business school? Is our School of Business, the Lundquist College, any further ahead here than other schools across the country? Are you aware of what's happening elsewhere?
We have a pretty good handle on what's going on, and it's a very dynamic, rapidly changing place for business schools right now. I think it's safe to say, without being critical, business schools were about the last parts of university to start to really tackle sustainability in a meaningful way. I think that mirrors the business community, I would say, in the last 5 years, really shifting into sort of what I think is the next generation of thinking around sustainability. Business schools have mirrored that. And so it's really been in the last 5 years that they've been aggressive. Nearly every serious MBA program is trying to figure out what to do. And you can go to conferences or talk to other programs, and they'll mostly be very candid about what they're doing, which is learning as much as they can and trying different things. And I think we're also along that path, but the advantage of the U of O, and I would say the Pacific Northwest, is there is a cultural affinity towards sustainability in the Pacific Northwest region that places us in a stronger position than most parts of North America. And I've been all over the place talking with folks and businesses and local governments. And so there is value to that. We've had some classes and we've had some faculty who've been at this for a long time. It presents an opportunity, but if we think we can simply build upon that in a very incremental fashion, we're going to be very quickly left behind by very large, very powerful programs like MIT or Cornell or any number of very well-regarded programs. But I think we're currently in an advantageous position, and we need to figure out how to best use that.
So no lack of students for this particular interest?
We seem to be attracting students, and what I've known in the 2 years that I've been here now, and really since the center was first launched 2.5 years ago, is our first group of students, except for one, were all from Oregon and Washington State. Our first year class of students, 2 years later, there's only one student from Oregon. 1/3 of the students we admitted into our first year class are international students. So we've clearly changed the reach of the MBA program, at least focused in this area, to one that has a national and international dimension. And I think previously it had more or less been a regional program.
You talked about how much things have changed in the last 5 years. So given that you've been in this area of endeavor for a little while, you've actually witnessed these changes and presumably helped push them ahead.
Right.
Are you creating this job as you go?
It's certainly in some ways a work in progress, and I would hope that whoever is in this role, if I'm not in the role 5 years from now or whatever period of time, I would hope whoever's in this role sees it as a constant work in progress. There is so much happening that's changing, and I think in the course of this year and next year we'll have 3 to 4 new classes that have been developed specifically around sustainability for the business school programs. And that's rapid change for an academic environment that has a fairly standard core set of courses that they provide for students. And so we're moving very quickly. And a good example of that, we had some students who were at this Net Impact Conference, which is a national conference of business schools and businesses. There's about 3,000 people, many companies. And we took a number of students there for the experience, as well as to help them prepare for next year when the U of O is co-hosting the national conference in Portland. And so they got the chance to talk to a lot of their peers in other programs. And as an example, Yale had probably 100 MBA students there, which is more than we have in the entire program here. And some of our students were interacting with them, and they were sharing stories about which classes they were taking and what was particularly interesting about it from a sustainability perspective. And our students were talking about taking classes like industrial ecology and life cycle analysis and energy finance courses, very customized, tailored classes. And the response from the students at Yale was, that's really interesting, we're taking accounting. And it's not that there's anything wrong with accounting, of course, but they don't even have those classes as options. And these are classes that all of the students in the center that I'm with take.
So in fact, that should be a draw for applicants
Absolutely.
looking for a particular business school.
Absolutely. The students here will say the draw is a very customized small program that gives them a lot of one-on-one attention, as well as being part of this sort of Oregon experience around sustainability. There really is, from an outside perspective, there really is a bit of an aura about it. And we can all, sort of in our own little bubble here in Oregon, we can all pick at it and debate whether it's real or not, or justified or not, but the reality is it's there, and the students see that, and they say, I want to come to a program that's small, that's focused on me, and on sustainability, and I want to be in Oregon because that's where it's happening. One of our colleagues, actually in the planning faculty, likes to make the analogy of, when you were a writer in the 1920s, you wanted to be in Paris. If you're working in sustainability now, you want to be here in Oregon.
That's a great way to look at it. It has a certain romanticism to it.
We may be overstating it, but.
Speaking of realities, does that mean that the students you're producing are particularly well suited to the current employment market and are actually landing good jobs?
We've had very good success. I don't have a ton of history with the program, but I look at the students that have graduated with the center as a feature that they can put on their resume. And actually 100% of our students have jobs. Of the total MBA cohort at the U of O that have graduated over the last 2 years, we have, actually by some distance, we have the best placement percentages in terms of students with jobs. We also have the highest median and average salary. So it seems to be the case. There's lots of data in California and in the United States talking about how job growth in what they call green sectors is continuing to grow at a much faster pace than the economy as a whole. So I think there definitely is an opportunity. Our students are in a good position to do that well. It's always a challenge for us. I think it's a small program. Oregon is not the highest ranked program, MBA program in the world. So we have to work really hard to make sure people know what our students are capable of. But so far we've been successful. And we need to really make sure that we take care of that, because it is a strength of our program. If we can tell our students that everybody's got a job, in this area, that makes a big difference.
That's a great great draw.
Yeah.
Tom, I wanted to ask you something which is on a broader scale beyond your immediate day-to-day reality in the business school, and that's what you and I were talking about a little bit earlier. Whether there's a definition of sustainability that is generally understood to be valid across fields. So you're working in a business school within the context of a capitalist economy, right? Would an environmentalist, would a legal scholar, would an eco-critic understand sustainability the same way you do?
It's a great question. I think the short answer is we all have our own definition if we've thought about it in a serious fashion. Generally speaking, I think most people would accept that sustainability means some balancing of environmental, economic, and social equity issues. There are those who would also say there's a cultural aspect to that as well. And I think there's room for a lot of discussion and a lot of variation on how people think about that. I would think from my perspective as an individual, and certainly as a professional inside the business school, I wouldn't take as strong an environmental stance, perhaps as an environmental advocacy organization, but I don't necessarily need to. And one of the things that I've learned over time is that I think if we emphasize economic and social aspects of sustainability, we actually have a better story to tell. And a good example of that would be green buildings, and a lot of people are pretty aware of green buildings now. People are pretty familiar with LEED, which is a rating system for green buildings, and virtually all major new buildings in Oregon now have some sort of LEED certification attached to them. And a lot of people looked early at the environmental benefits of green building, and they're significant. And we've gotten very good at it in terms of reducing energy use, reusing water, materials, and so forth. But if you quantify those benefits and you put a price on those benefits, they're very small compared to the economic and social benefits to the occupants of the buildings and the owners of the buildings. Green buildings are worth more in the marketplace. Employees who work in buildings that are green are more healthy and more productive and happier. And the money that organizations spend on their people far outstrips what they spend on utilities and on the building. And so from a purely economic point of view, green buildings are a win. But that's not where that conversation started. And so I think it's pretty interesting. And if we open ourselves up to that kind of exploration of what does it mean, I think we'll be surprised at the real benefits.
I wanted to ask you to talk about what you've discovered in your work in Portland and Vancouver, working with heavy industry, working with all kinds of different commercial enterprises. Right. What is still hindering progress towards really significant gains in sustainability?
I think there are three elements that I would point to that are clear challenges that we have to be very focused on. One is, first and foremost, sustainability is a people problem. And by people problem, I mean we have to build capacity. There are senior managers and professionals who've been working for 40 years, and they've been professionals long before any notion of sustainability was ever brought into the public discussion. And some of them may innately take that broad view of we want to balance business and economic and social interests. But for many, it's a new concept. It's one they're not familiar with. They haven't had access to information or training. And working in a business environment, you're not exactly invited to spend a lot of time thinking about things like that. And so there's a generational component that I think we have to be aware of, not be critical, but recognize that it exists and be very strategic. And sometimes it means you wait.
Let me interrupt you for a second. You said that is building capacity. Does that mean educating people to the idea?
Educating people to the ideas and working very hard to show them how it makes a difference. Okay. Having people talk about, especially in our building, we talk about the business case for sustainability all the time. And we have to be very focused on that. That's part of the capacity building process. Because I think there is still a sizable part of the business community. Again, it's predominant in the older generation because they just never had this exposure while they were in school or as young professionals to what's happening now. And some of the challenges that we faced just weren't challenges that they faced then. So we have to be very mindful of they need that information, and it's incumbent upon us to give them that information in a way that's useful to them and in a way that's not threatening to them and is not critical about all of the work that's been done, because that's not a fair I think that's not a fair way to approach it. So I think that's one key issue. Another is, we've built this economic system that we have in the United States and in Canada. They're tightly woven together with a very complex and sometimes murky array of policies, incentives, whether tax policy or direct incentives for certain industries. And it takes a long time to pick that apart and figure out where it's influencing the market, where it's inhibiting changes in the market. And I think we all see that on energy. People talk about there needs to be a price on carbon. Well, there also needs to be no subsidies for fossil fuels, right? But we're continuing to do that. So there's this whole policy, incentive, economic structure that's going to take a long time to change. And in some cases, we have to overcome those barriers. In some cases, we have to recognize that change is going to happen through those channels. And then the third thing, I think, is creating an environment, sort of culturally, an environment in which we're much more positive about the future. A lot of criticism has been brought to bear on the environmental community in particular because they come at it from, if we don't do something, terrible things are going to happen. And we can all debate whether that's true or not. But I don't think that that's something that's going to get people up in the morning and excited about making change happen in their organization. And so I think we really need to work hard on what the positive messages are.
That's a tall order.
Yes. No small task, yes.
Yeah. I wanted to get back a little bit to something related to number 2, which is pushing at the economic structures that can be a hindrance at the same time as they also can move things ahead a little bit. When you were talking about making changes to the curriculum at the business school, you said that incremental change is not enough. And I've read something you've written that says incremental change in economic structures is also not enough. It needs to be much bolder. So how do you move beyond incremental changes, one subsidy, one incentive at a time, and actually put measures into place that will create real innovation and real gains?
It's an excellent question, and I would be overstating things to think I really know the answer to this, but I have some ideas about how to tackle that. And one of the things I think is very important in that conversation is to acknowledge that in a lot of cases we don't know what's going to happen in the future, and so we're trying to make good strategic guesses about what we think is going to happen. And so the implications within the academic context are there's a real premium on people who are very good at doing scenario planning, not sort of predictive models, which are very rigorous and highly quantitative and very precise, but rather, what if this happened? And, well, what if you change that? Would that change the result? And it's a different view of modeling than in other cases, and I think just within our own bounds, the more we can do that, the more we can help show people what's possible. I think above and beyond that, we have to look at where we're having some successes. And we can see in Oregon many cases of that, whether it's the number of people who've bought hybrid vehicles, to the number of people who buy green power through their utility, to the number of people who are starting to line up to buy electric vehicles, or they buy local food, or whatever it is. We have, and what's widely acknowledged as the best early adopter market in the country for those sorts of things. And it's true generally for Oregon. It's especially true for Portland. And one of the things that I like to think about there is that's great, but if we don't use that to drive change in the rest of the market, we're not actually having an impact that we could or need to have. And a good example of that would be, again, around greenhouse gases. Getting 30% of the market to use hybrid vehicles or buy green power doesn't really solve the problem. And if you did a very narrow financial analysis of it, you say it might not even be worth it if that's all you're going to do. If we need to get everybody to do it, what does that look like? And it's starting to pose challenges to fundamental business models around utilities, for example. Utilities were made to provide energy to everybody at the lowest possible cost with the greatest reliability. And that made sense for what we asked them to do 50 years ago when we set those regulations in place. But now we have a slightly different challenge. And so we need to make that challenge one that they need to solve. So how would they change if they said, okay, you don't need to necessarily just do that. You also have to reduce or eliminate the carbon from your energy system. And it's led to Portland General Electric, for example, proposing closing the only coal plant in Oregon. And that's a big step. And it's one that a lot of people are uncomfortable with because they don't know yet, 10 years from now, what's going to take its place. But I'd like to think we have 10 years. We're going to figure it out, and maybe we can even figure it out faster.
But you're also a proponent of bottom-up as opposed to top-down change, right? And that probably speaks to all the work you've done on neighborhood-based initiatives. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I've been lucky, I guess, if you call it lucky. I've been lucky to work at federal, state, and local government level. I've worked in the private sector and nonprofit. And one of the things I learned working at the state level was if you wanted to influence federal policy, the best thing to do is not go to Washington, D.C. and hire lobbyists. The best thing to do is to get 3 to 5 states to do something different, to change their own policies. And if you want to change state law, the best thing to do is to get 5 communities or local governments to change their policies. It's a lot easier to drive change at that scale. You have much more engagement of the public than you do at a higher level of government. And we've built a system of government that is reactive and responsive, and it's actually designed to limit the exercise of government power. That's why we designed government the way we did. And so I'm a big believer in driving innovation at the lowest level possible and letting that tell us what works on the ground, so then at the next level up, we can enact policies that are thoughtful about how to do more of that and how to do it better.
Do you still have the opportunity to do that kind of activism here in this job?
Absolutely. Part of what we're doing, and we have funding from external parties to help us do this, we work with communities on energy planning for 20 years. And we help them think about energy efficiency, clean energy, infrastructure, and financing of that entire system. What are the things that they can do and need to do if they want to achieve a certain very aggressive standard of performance by 2030? And then we essentially create a strategy and a business plan for them to operationalize it. And we're doing that in several cities in the region. I'm going next week to Washington, D.C. to participate in a conversation around how to reinvent utilities so that they can facilitate that kind of change at the local level. So we continue to work that way, and as long as I'm in this role, we'll continue to really focus on innovation at that level, because I think that's where we can have the biggest impact.
Briefly, we're running out of time, but I had to ask you this question. You're described as a leading expert on product stewardship. Can you just explain that to a humanist like me, please?
Absolutely. So I think many of us know, and we'll use consumer electronics as an example. Many of us know that when we're done with our computer, and some computers will only last 3 to 5 years, if we simply just throw it away, there's an environmental problem. There's lots of heavy metals and other components. Some of the material is fire retardant, and that has chemicals associated and so forth. In addition to that, there's a lot of value in terms of pure resources bound up in the electronic gadgetry. So what happens to that at the end of its life? And product stewardship is really just recognizing that the designers and makers and sellers of products have a responsibility for the end of life. And in fact, end of life can be the beginning of another life. And it's taken about 15 years, but you've really seen the consumer electronics industry embrace product stewardship as an overarching construct for how they view their product and how they work with state and local governments so that they can collect electronics when we're done, get them back, and recycle them back into a new product. Increasingly important with the global economy growth, where precious metals are scarce indeed. The prices of copper and gold and so forth, they're through the roof. So it's absolutely essential. But the idea of stewardship is they have a responsibility for what happens after we're done with it.
You've got a lot of different ways to work on this.
Yeah.
You're a busy man.
There's plenty to do, yes.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to help, they're welcome.
You may well find viewers who take you up on that.
Yeah.
We're going to have to stop there, Tom, but I would love to have you back in a year and see how things are going.
Anytime. Love to give you an update.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Barbara.
We've been speaking with Tom Osdoba, Managing Director of the Center for Sustainable Business Practices at the University of Oregon's Lundquist College of Business, and an affiliated faculty member of the Sustainable Cities Initiative. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.